Okay, you guys. Well, thank you so much and welcome back to another amazing empowerment session. This has been an amazing week so far. We started it off with intention setting and how to figure out your days, your weeks, your year so that you can stay with your goals and hit all of those fun vision board achievements that we're looking for. Yesterday, our amazing board staff did a parenting session about motherhood, fatherhood, all the things in between. Today, we're going to have a great session with our wonderful friend Erik about boundaries. And then, if you guys aren't busy for the rest of the week, tomorrow we'll be doing one on getting involved with the community. And so I'll be leading it, and we'll just be talking about what kind of communities there are to get involved in and how to kind of build off of that. And then the end of the week is going to be great. It's seated Zumba. Teniel has done multiple events with us, and she's going to come back for another round of fun, fit movement, dance energy. So that's always my favorite way to end the week. So first of all, thank you guys for showing up tonight. I know you guys have busy lives, lots of things going on. And it's not just about showing up for Wheel With Me Foundation. It's honestly just about showing up for yourselves. The more time you take to pour into you guys, the better your future and independence will be moving down the road. So thank you guys for taking an hour of your nights to pour into you. And then I wanted to thank our amazing host, Erik, for taking some time out of his busy schedule. Erik has been a supporter, partner, collaborator of Wheel With Me Foundation for a very long time. He does some really amazing projects for the community. He helps build affordable chairs for the community, kind of gives those blueprints out for free on his website. He helps raise money for individuals in other countries who may need a chair. We've kind of helped a couple of those funds with him, and it's been such a cool process to be involved in. And then every year at camp, he comes with a van full of toys and hoverboards and skateboards, and just kind of helps bring the community to this whole new level of like outdoor play fun. Today is going to be a little different. He's going to kind of switch gears on us today. Instead of focusing on movement and that physical stuff, he's going to dive into that emotional boundary setting stuff, which is just as important as getting out and being active. And so, without further ado, thank you so much, Erik, for taking your time tonight, and the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you for the introduction. So, one of my goals for tonight is not to bore people by talking for an hour. So, in order to do that, I like to get, have a discussion going and have people talk back and forth. Because really, what I like to do here is talk about boundary setting. A little bit, how I got involved in this. I started a nonprofit. Profit for teaching self-defense more than 10 years ago. That came out of a pretty extensive background in martial arts. But the more I got into dealing with self-defense and physical stuff, the more I realized that boundary setting is really the root of it all, so to speak, and is very, very important. And one of the things as wheelchair users, as people with disabilities, I see this so much in interacting with people. What they post is that, when you have a disability, people are constantly, violating and breaking boundaries. Like this happens very regularly. And I'm going to say, generally speaking, this is going to happen more to women than it happens to men. So you have a double whammy. Now, I'm going to ask a question here. Why do you think that is the case? Why is it that we think as people with disabilities, we have more of an issue than, say, the, quote, average able-bodied person?
Hmm. I don't know, Eric. That's a really good question.
I
Why
think
do
there's
you
a
think? I
level.
mean, like societally, we've been like kind of conditioned that it's okay for able-bodied people to do that.
Well, I think there's a level of we are not economically viable. We have less value in society, and we constantly need help for everything. So, like, there's some, they feel there's an ownership because they think they're supporting us financially. So then it justifies, boundaries. What boundaries? You don't have them because we're supporting your lifestyle. If it wasn't for our taxes, you might starve. You might not have your medical supplies.
I also agree, like, that probably the support, like, one thing could be, it's like, well, I see your friend, pushes your wheelchair. It's just like, yeah, because they know how it works. Like, a stranger is completely different. But they don't have that personal experience of it, so they think it's like the same. While other boundaries, they do have personal experience. Like, my friend can take my hat, but some random stranger can't, because I've experienced that.
Right. And then also just what about intrusive questions that people ask you, personal questions that they wouldn't ask, a comparative able-bodied stranger. You guys have experience with that or thoughts
Oh
on
yeah,
that?
like that expectation of an answer for those massively personal questions, and then the confusion of the fact that we are calling them out that they crossed boundaries.
Right, right. So I'm going to wrap it up. In general, in society, if you have a disability, you're basically, in a lower social class. And people in a higher social class believe that they can break the boundaries of someone in the lower social class in a way that it's not even an issue. They're not even thinking it's a boundary. The same way that you can like tell a kid what to do. They're like, well, you got a disability. I'm a higher social class. Therefore, it's okay to ask me these kind of questions. And, to think about this, let's say if you encounter the Queen of England, right? High social class, you don't all of a sudden there's all sorts of rules of behavior as how you interact with them because they're of high status. But again, low status, it's able-bodied people in general are comfortable with breaking boundaries. So I just want to throw that out there to start as to why this is so important and why this is such an issue. So one of the things I like to do is you can buy a ton of books on personal boundary setting. Get on, Amazon, you're going to get 20, 30 books, whatever. And it's all focusing on personal boundary setting. For me, what I like to do is teach this model that I created. And the point of the model is that I think boundary setting is not just personal, it's how all humans interrelate with everyone else in civilization. And that means governments engage in boundary settings, from a really high level, and then all the way down to people and everything in between. So I don't know if you guys are following the news, right? But there's a lot of stuff going on in the news regarding Greenland and, all sorts of things that are really, in essence, about boundary setting. Wars are about boundary setting. You got wars and deterrence and all of that. So what we want to do is I've created a model that helps us understand boundary setting in the big picture, which helps you be more effective at boundary setting for yourself, if that makes sense. Because ultimately, nobody can teach you boundary setting. You have to teach it to yourself through your own experience. And whatever you do, it's going to be different. So if Alita can say the exact same phrase as me, it's going to be taken by someone else differently because we're not the same people. So nobody can tell you exactly how to respond to something. It's very individual. So that being said, I have basically what I call the 3 elements of boundary setting. In fact, I actually put them on this thing here. I got my camera off, so I can't see it, but there's 3 words here, and they are respect, communication, and enforcement. I got a model. You have to write this down or whatever. I have a whole model with this. You guys can see it. So, but we're going to start with that: respect, communication, and enforcement, and they all work together. So we'll start with a little story. All right. You are with a group of people. You're on a boat. You're stranded, and the boat sinks. You all swim to the island. You're all on the island by yourself, right? Okay. After a little while, what has to happen? You're in a group of people. What do you guys need to do to get some kind of society going, assuming you're going to be there for a while? What's the
Rules.
rules? Nailed it, right? The rules of behavior are super important because what happens when we don't have the rules of behavior?
Chaos.
chaos. And what's that? Oh, Lord of the Flies, right?
Anarchy.
They had it for a little while and then they lost it. Okay. So you have the rules of behavior. Okay. Once we have presumably people get together and they agree on what the rules of behavior are. All right. Once you have that, those rules need to be communicated. So everyone needs to know what the rules of behavior are, right? That's why, we have laws. People need to know what the laws are. We agree on that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So we got rules, and then rules need to be communicated. What's the third thing that needs to happen?
Enforcement.
Enforcement. All right. Why do we need enforcement?
Otherwise, people disregard the rules.
Right. And so what are some examples of that in real life that we can think of?
Jail time. Probation.
Okay. All right.
Fines.
You are all fired up. All right. Okay. So jail time, absolutely. That's enforcement. What else? What are other examples of enforcement or non-enforcement?
Social consequences, isolation.
Yeah.
Withholding resources.
Right. So I would say that. So a big thing back in the day was banishment. Right. That's a social you're really outside. You can't come back to the village, and then you get eaten, and that's the end of you. All right. So that's another thing. So one of the things is there's a lot of international courts. We've all heard of them, right?
Yep.
Okay. What's the problem with international courts? They got rules of behavior. They communicate them, but what can't they do?
Enforce them.
And so does it really matter?
Not to some people.
enforces it.
Right. So again, if you can't enforce your rules of behavior effectively, it doesn't matter. So the one I didn't talk about was respect. So the whole idea is that if you have a whole lot of respect, you don't need a lot of communication. You don't need a lot of enforcement, right? Because if we all follow the rules, then you don't need enforcement. You need enforcement when somebody breaks the rules. So again, if we think about it in a society where things are working out really well, or an environment, or like this group, whatever it is, where there's a lot of respect, you don't need enforcement. Where is a place where you need a lot of enforcement?
Mental hospitals.
Okay, it's all right, but let me add to that. That is a little bit more complicated because you just said mental hospital. Because in that situation, we could be dealing with people who don't necessarily understand the rules, right?
Okay, a prison.
So,
They got a lot of rules in prison.
Here we go. All right. In a prison, a tremendous amount of enforcement. We agree?
Yeah.
Because the assumption is, and pretty reasonably, that the people there, most of them, don't respect the rules, right? Therefore, you need a tremendous amount of enforcement. So the lesser respect, the more enforcement required. So the idea is that enforcement is intended to create respect for the rules. So that's how it all works together. You got the rules of behavior, they got to be communicated. If they're violated, they need to be enforced. But the enforcement is intended to create respect. Now, where boundary setting fails is when enforcement doesn't create respect. Then you have a problem. Most of the time, like again, I'm gonna go back to most of the time when you read about personal boundary setting and so forth, what they don't talk about is when the enforcement doesn't actually work. So what are some examples of, and now we're going to go back to, like, say, personal boundaries. What are examples of a personal violation that would require some enforcement that we can use? Your own story or someone else's story, we don't care.
Answering your phone during work time.
Okay, so what's the rule? Well, so explain the rule and what's the problem.
So I don't answer, like, my working hours are 8 to 5, so I don't answer my phone between 8 to 5. And my close friends and family know that if they call me during that time, that they're going to get a call back. Because if I try to answer my phone during work hours, I can get derailed and my whole thought process just gets thrown completely off, and it takes me a while to get back into that work mode.
All right. So your rule is don't call me during that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then and effectively, what happens if people keep calling you?
I just keep getting distracted.
No, but what do you do?
Oh, for me now, now I just keep my phone in D&D work mode.
Okay. And they keep calling you.
Mm-hmm. Well, not anymore, but this was a problem in the past for sure. Yeah. And in the past, I would answer. In the past, I would always answer, and then I'd
And
get
now you just
derailed.
don't answer.
So now I just don't answer. Yeah, I
Okay. So
have
in this
hard
case,
stops.
her enforcement is not answering the phone.
Mm-hmm.
But and hopefully and hopefully people don't keep calling. That's really low level of enforcement, because we haven't necessarily changed the behavior of the people who are calling, right? You're just not answering the phone.
I can give you an enforcement.
All right, let's get another one.
So I was in a parking lot and some gentleman, love this, screamed across the parking lot. I don't know this person, by the way. What's wrong with you? Wow. Okay. So I
All right,
turn
so
around
number
back
one,
up.
violation, right, of the rules of behavior. That's not normal, right?
So I give him another chance. He comes back over and repeats it. I make him walk over. Okay, you're going to repeat it. And my enforcement is I explained to him why that was very inappropriate, unacceptable behavior, and I don't find that acceptable. And he decided to justify it. And I said, yeah, that doesn't work for me. You can't treat people like that. And I gave him an analogy that explained to him how rude that was and how he was crossing a boundary of someone. I gave him an example of someone with PSTD in the military. Like, you wouldn't ask someone, what was your worst day? So I gave him a chance to think about what he did wrong. And if he had continued, we would have elevated the consequences, but that was enough. He said, sorry, moved on.
Right, so that's a great example. Okay, so we have a violation of the rules of social norms. Again, this is what I'm saying is this is not normal behavior. Able-bodied people do not scream at other able-bodied people and do this. This guy does it because he's an able-bodied person, sees someone with a disability, and feels that he's entitled to ask a question and get an answer. So now Caroline is number one, involved in a lot of communication, right? So in this case, communication can be a form of enforcement. And so communication kind of crosses the boundary between just information and also a level of enforcement. And Caroline also mentioned the word escalation. Okay, so escalation is something you need to do when your first level of enforcement doesn't work. But one of the real important things is when we're engaging in this is we need to figure out something that's super important. When somebody violates the rules of behavior, they either violate it because they have no respect for the rules of behavior, or they are unaware of the rules of behavior. It's really, it's either one or the other. They didn't know it was there, they didn't know they're breaking a rule, or they knew the rule exists and violated it anyway, which basically means they have a lack of respect for the rules of behavior. This is why I said, when Tara said a mental hospital, I said not necessarily, because we don't know whether the person in there actually understands what the rule of behavior is. Now, here's a question. Why does it matter? Why do you need to know?
Because it changes how you respond. Because if you know they have just a lack of respect for the rule, then you need to respond in a way that, like, either they have to, like the consequence is too big, or you just totally disregard, like, fine, I'll cut you off. But if they don't understand it, then you go for the route of let's try to communicate before other things.
Right, exactly. So in other words, depending on which one it is, you're going to have two different types of responses. If they lack respect for the rule of behavior, you don't need to communicate the rule because they already know it. If they don't understand the rule or unaware of the rule, then communication is super important. So also, again, you need a higher level of enforcement for someone who lacks respect for the rule of behavior. They're going to need a higher level. So how do we figure out which kind of person we're dealing with?
You have to set a boundary and see what happens.
Which means what?
Tell them, give them a consequence. If you do this, X will happen.
I would say like try communication first, and like that's what you're saying, Caroline, is like I'm communicating. This is the rule and the consequence.
And if they blow through your communication, you know it wasn't accidental, it was intentional. So that informs your next move.
Right, exactly. So we have to get rid of this question of, does this person not understand the rules? The way to do that is to specifically, this is setting a boundary, explain the rule. If you explain the rule in a very clear, concise manner, then there is no question, if they violate it, what the situation is. This is why it's so important, because you need clarity. If you don't have clarity, you don't know how to make the enforcement. And because of that, so the first step really is to set the boundary, communicate what the rule is or what the violation is, and then again see how to respond. Now, what's a typical example of this? All right, you're somewhere out in the public and someone comes up and starts talking to you. You don't want to talk to them. You don't want to talk to anyone. So what do people typically do when they're in public and they don't want to talk to someone? What does that look like? There's a very common thing that people do.
Short responses.
Okay, but even before that, even before someone comes
Don't
to
make
talk
eye
to
contact.
you,
Avoid eye contact.
You don't
Yeah.
make eye contact. You
Okay.
put your head down, you kind of close your body off,
Right.
you shrug your shoulders.
This is all body language. Okay. So I call this, there's a progressive fence, starts with body language. So body language is intended, the body language you mentioned is intended to communicate a message. And that message is, I'm not interested in engaging with you, right? This is very well known. Pretty much everyone knows this body language. So somebody comes up and talks to you anyway. Now what?
Well, you can choose to respond or you can ignore.
Okay, so you're using your body language. They come up to talk to you, and you don't want to talk to them, so you just engage in more of the same body language. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, you could. You could either just completely ignore them and not talk to them, not look at them, or you could look at them and respond in many different ways. You could choose to engage in conversation, or you could ask them to leave you alone. I feel like there's a lot of different options.
Right, exactly, depending on the situation. So if you escalate to asking them to leave you alone, you're going to communicate. So you're going to a higher level of communication. So remember, body language is a low level of communication. It's a low fence, right? When I say it's a low fence, if you're going down the street, and there's all like these little low fences around somebody's rose garden, it doesn't stop anyone from going and stepping on the roses, right? But it says, please respect this little area. Okay, that's a low fence. A higher fence might be waist high. So that keeps more people out. It's like, oh, this actually kind of worked to go over that. A really high fence, is like a prison wall. That's a really high level of enforcement. So we're moving up the enforcement chain or communication chain. So we've gone from body language to verbal. Now, the thing about verbal is a lot of people are really bad at verbal. And they're afraid of saying, look, I'm not interested in talking to you. Why is that?
I would say mainly fear of like not knowing what the response will be.
I'd say hurting for me, it's hurting people's feelings and then it like backfiring on you and like making you look like you're like a bad person somehow.
Or just being non-confrontational. They're just not confrontational beings. Yeah.
Wait, say that again. I'm very.
Just being non-confrontational. They don't
Oh,
want to start conflict.
if you're just a non-confrontational person, right?
Correct.
Generally speaking, one of the reasons why people are unwilling to speak up is because they're afraid of a backlash, right?
Mhm.
So over enforcement creates a backlash. Under enforcement creates contempt for the rules. This is like the whole thing that people need to understand, that if you don't enforce, it's typically because you're afraid of a backlash. And a backlash could be somebody getting really angry, or, Tara had an example, right? Whatever, it's somewhere along that line. You're afraid of creating a backlash. So it's very typical for people to under enforce. I will also say that this is a somewhat of a genderized thing. Women typically under enforce more than men.
Agree.
Mhm.
And that is a socialization thing, right? So women tend to, I'm not saying all women, I'm saying in general, when women tend to engage in a lot of more body language, and they're hoping that the body language will work. And when they communicate, they're not as direct, and they're hoping that the other person will get the message and leave them alone. This is all predicated on this other person having respect. So everything works when the person you're dealing with is respectful. The problem is when you're dealing with someone who is not respectful. Then those strategies that work for people who have respect don't work. Which is where you need to. They have the situation where you need to escalate. Now, again, getting back to this idea of level enforcement, in my opinion and in my model, the appropriate level of enforcement is in the eye of the beholder, the other person, not you. Why am I saying that? What does that even mean?
Well, I would say it's like, what would work for enforcement changes per person. And it's their behavior that's gonna change.
I was gonna say you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
True.
Ye-
Keep
Like you
going with
can
that, Alita.
Sorry.
Keep going, Alita. Keep
Oh,
going with what you're saying.
yeah. So it's like, you know, someone's tolerance for how far they're gonna go being disrespectful or respectful is based on their own personality or mind. So it's like one person will be like, it's enough for them to just hear like, no, go away, and someone else like, you need to like make it a scene. It's like it's all on them, really.
Right, exactly. So
Different
this is
boundaries.
go ahead, Caroline.
Yeah, just different levels of boundaries.
Right. So the other person that you're dealing with is going to have a different perspective on your level of enforcement, whether it is, again, just right or appropriate, too much or too little.
Mm-hmm.
And where people get into trouble is when they think, say I use a certain level of enforcement, which I think is appropriate. And I'm like, okay, I gave them appropriate level of enforcement, everything is fine. But the other person, it's not appropriate. Either they see it as too much, creating a backlash, or too little. So this is the thing about boundary setting. It's basically an art, because we don't actually know what the appropriate level of enforcement is going to be, because it's not about you, it's about them. So based on that, how do we figure out what it is?
Would it like with the approach of like just like ramping it up like incrementally work? Because then like eventually you're gonna hit that sweet spot, but maybe it's hard to do it incrementally.
Well, exactly. So that is the basic strategy, that you have to escalate and you have to move up. Now, granted, you can't take too long. It completely depends on the situation as to how rapidly you escalate. But you have to have it. This is why I'm saying there's no right answer to any given situation, but there is an overall strategy. And the overall strategy, starts with defining, the rules of behavior, communicating them, and if they continue to violate, progressively escalating your level of enforcement, which, if you think about this in terms of self-defense, at some point it becomes physical. Now, physical doesn't necessarily mean fighting back. It could mean physically getting up, moving, away. That is also physical. Right. So we need to understand that when I talk about the progressive fence, it starts with body language, it goes to verbal, and then it goes to physical. So it moves up the line. Now, if somebody grabs you and is immediately physical, then you can jump right through. And that's important. But the idea is to understand the model so that we can kind of make sense of what's going on in the world. So if, again, we'll use an example of look at what's happening with ICE in Minnesota and the shooting and so forth, right? We have multiple models here of colliding boundary setting. So, from ICE's standpoint, particularly in this shooting, okay, they're engaging in self-defense, right? They're like, okay, I'm being attacked. My response of enforcement is to shoot this woman dead, right? That's what they believe. And there are a lot of people who believe this is completely appropriate. That's their opinion. It's in the eye of the beholder. There are other people who look at this as huge over-enforcement. As a result, there's a lot of protesting. There's less respect. So ICE has come in really hard, and they're not necessarily generating a lot of respect from the community because the community sees this as over-enforcement. Over-enforcement creates a backlash against the rules. But that being said, what happened before that? Well, we had a lot of people violating the rules and there was no enforcement, which created a lack of respect for the rules. So everywhere we look, we're going to see societal boundary setting. And you're going to see over-enforcement, under-enforcement, and then hopefully where situations are actually working really well, there's probably an appropriate level of enforcement. And that's what gets the system to work. So our goal is to always try to figure out, how do we achieve this equilibrium? How do we achieve this appropriate level of enforcement? And nobody can tell you, because it completely depends on the situation. So let's do another example. Can we get another example of some typical?
So I pulled into a parking spot, and an older gentleman backed up in a vehicle, in a big truck, into the accessible spot next to the lines of the one that I was in. And he got out of his vehicle, and I asked him nicely, I said, "Sir, you've parked over the hash lines, and I can't safely get in and out of my vehicle. You're over those access lines. Could you please move over?" And he came at me, and instead of me thinking that it was going to be oh yeah, gosh, I didn't even notice that I backed into those lines, I'll move, it turned into those, that's not for, I don't need to worry about how he parks, and I'm just an effing liberal anyways. And I don't know how it turned into that, but and that you know, me asking for this. And so I was like, "Well, sir, actually, that's what those lines are there for. They are access lines. They are not to be parked in. They are for," and then I deployed my ramp and showed him, and it was still a total thing. So it did escalate to the point where I did call the police on him. So right, we talked about, I talked
Escalation,
to him.
right?
Yep, escalation. I talked to him. That didn't work. I had to call law enforcement, and we were going into the same building, which is my chiropractor's office. And then it got to the point where that owner of the chiropractor's office called him as well to make sure that this wasn't going to be an issue again because of the way that he walked into the office swearing about me.
Right. Unfortunately, this is not uncommon, right? Like nobody here, I'm sure, is like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened, because that shit happens all the time. So, but that's actually a great example to
Erik, I've never had
a
that
lot of
happen.
what we've been talking about, right? So, number one, starting in the beginning, right? He doesn't have respect for people with disabilities, right? Okay, that's a societal thing, you know. Apparently,
It could be a
doesn't like
woman. It could be a woman
it
thing.
could
The
be a
fact that
woman
I
thing.
opened my mouth. God
Apparently,
forbid.
yes, there's that. You'll it right. Apparently, come across as a liberal. All of this stuff adds together. Okay, so from his standpoint, why is he upset? Let's just take his perspective,
Because I called him out on doing something,
which
Well,
he believes.
even if it was kind, that he
Yeah,
believes
but
is not wrong.
yes, but exactly. So in his world, he hasn't violated any rules, correct? He's just parking. Hey, I'm just parking the car.
And I have an accessible hanging thing, and I have the right to park here.
But what I'm saying is, in his world, he's not doing anything wrong, right?
Correct.
In his world, he isn't doing anything wrong, and then you're calling him out on something, but he hasn't done anything wrong. Therefore, anything you do is what?
Well, is wrong.
Is over enforcement.
Oh, you're right. Right.
Right? Because he hasn't done anything wrong. Therefore, it created a backlash, right? So that is a perfect example of the backlash. And again, it being in the eye of the beholder and a person who lacks respect for the rules. Because presumably, once you pointed out, because he could have parked there and been like, oh, I've never seen hash marks before. I had no idea. I should be parking further to the left. I didn't realize that. You've cleared, you made it clear. So the fact that you have pointed this out shows that he has no respect for the rules of behavior. Right? So, and then you start with communication. Communication doesn't work. You have to escalate to some kind of level of enforcement, which is getting the police involved.
I probably could have left, but
it doesn't matter if he could have left or whatever. I'm just saying that this is how it plays out.
Yep.
And this is why we're saying it's all about that other person. Because that person has no respect for the rules, and therefore when you enforce, it automatically creates, over enforcement, which is a really difficult situation to deal with. We have another example or related story?
I have one if no one else does, but I mean,
let's hear it, Carol.
So I was going to the bathroom. I was going to Goodwill to get an item for the house. I needed to go to the bathroom. Many of us can't tell if we've made it or haven't. And unfortunately, there was only one stall because the other one was out. So I went in. I was on the line of I didn't make it. Very unfortunate. I was much more mad about the situation than anybody else. But obviously, once you open up Pandora's box, you can't put it back in. You gotta clean the situation. So I'm very upset because I had a very bad week. And 20 minutes of cleaning later, we were getting there. But I was upset. So I was actually on the phone with my husband, and I get a knock on the door. Are you coming out? I said, oh, well, it's going to be a little bit. You might want to use another bathroom. Get another knock a little bit later. You've been in there too long. Well, I'm paralyzed. I had an accident. I can't do anything about it. You might want to find another bathroom. Another knock. We're calling the police if you don't come out here right now. Interesting. I said, well, I'm not sure how you would like me to do that. I don't think you're going to like the consequences if I do get off the toilet before things are finished up. So I leave the bathroom, livid, shaking, because I'm like, I'm being threatened in a bathroom. The public bathroom. There's bathrooms right down next door. And most people are ashamed. One isn't. And I know I'm going to explode on that one that isn't. So I give myself some distance and then I go some consequences for what. So the enforcement of what I think is unfair rules. And I go and talk to the manager and we have a good old conversation. We got somewhere. I wouldn't say there was a lot of accountability, but we got understanding and the response that he was willing to talk to his employees and have them not treat someone who's disabled so poorly.
Right. So that's a great example. So let's back again. Lots of conflicts are really multiple people boundary setting on each other. So what is this employee doing?
So they were contacted by the other people in the store thinking that I was abusing the rules of the bathroom of how long you were allowed to use the bathroom.
Right, exactly. So this is why we have, conflicting boundary setting. They're like, oh, there's a person in there, they're violating the rules, and I'm going to go in there and enforce the rules, right? Yeah. That's what their belief is. So we're starting there. But then in encountering you, you're explaining something, which should clarify the situation, right? That this is actually not you abusing, the bathroom policy. You're in there because it takes as long as it takes. So that should be a clarification. So they should no longer need to engage in enforcement because there is no violation. But they continue to do it. So what started out as a no big deal now becomes a violation on you because they're encroaching on your basic right to use the bathroom for as long as you need to do it, given the situation.
Yep.
Right. So again, this is why boundary setting is so hard, because it's very important to recognize that it's not so simple as, okay, there's a definite bad guy, I'm the good guy, anything that they do is bad, anything I do is good. It goes back and forth, and each person typically thinks that they're the good guy, and invariably they tend to violate somebody else's boundaries. And so part of all this is trying to understand what's going on, because otherwise we're just going to have conflicts all over the place.
That's exactly what happened. It was honestly a 45-minute long conversation with the manager because I understood, as angry as I understood he had no clue what he was talking about. So we had to go through and I had to explain piece by piece by piece why his reasoning for why I was wrong was in fact wildly incorrect. By the end, he begrudgingly agreed, but didn't want to actually take any action to remedy the issue, saying, well, it's not my fault, I employ disabled people. Like that's, that
right. That's again, human nature. People don't,
yep.
They don't want to take responsibility for what they did. And I think that's a whole other issue is to recognize that, lots of people do not want, when they're called out or enforced upon, they're going to double down. And because if they're explained to them and they're like, oh, I actually made a mistake, they don't want to say that. They don't, particularly to someone with a disability. Again, this gets back to the original thing that we're talking about before. So enforcement when you have a disability is much more difficult. And a lower level enforcement is much more likely to create a backlash because of the perceived that the person with disability shouldn't be saying anything anyway. Therefore, it's more likely when we say something, it's taken as over enforcement.
So I will say the one that has helped me, because I will fight anyone verbally on this, is I will start with, I understand you don't know because I didn't know. So I've already taken away, I've given them the out. They're not a terrible, horrible person. I didn't know too. So fair enough. Like, let's just talk about the issue and let's just get a resolution. I'm not here to fight. I just don't want this happening.
Right, and that's a great point, and I think what you're trying to do is to disarm the person in the first place, so that they don't necessarily have to double down.
Yeah, you don't have to fight me. I'm not looking for a fight. I'm looking for you to change your behavior because it's inappropriate. That's all.
This is actually an interesting point too, because it's almost like you're like that's a way to bring respect into the scenario. Like then if they feel like they're attacked, then the respect is not there at all. So it's like,
Yeah.
oh, it can be factored in now.
I'm not saying you're a bad person. Just what you did
Yep.
was unacceptable. Just don't do it again. You don't understand why. I'm happy to explain it. I'm not going to enjoy it, but you know what? I'm going to tell you it's fine. We'll talk about it. We'll have a conversation, mutual respect. It's fine.
Right. So again, respect. So the model for you guys to remember that we have the three elements of boundary setting: respect, communication, and enforcement. The goal of enforcement is to create respect for the rules of behavior. If it doesn't create respect, then it's not working. It's really as simple as that. If boundary setting, what you're doing, does not create respect for the rules of behavior, it's not working. So, and then it's not working if it's perceived as over enforcement, creates the backlash. Under enforcement creates contempt for the rules. The idea is that just right or appropriate enforcement is really the only thing that can potentially create respect. So we got, that's a model. And then again, for something to think about is what I talk about, the progressive fence. So that is body language, verbal, physical. That escalates up. We always start with body language because you can basically not communicate with somebody unless you're on the phone or something and not show body language. So it always starts there. And people tend to get themselves into trouble when they use too much body language and they think that their body language is super effective when it's not. And also, verbal becomes a problem because a lot of times people use too much body language, don't use verbal until they're really pissed off. So instead of just saying it in a assertive manner without emotion, at that point, the time that they go verbal, they are already pissed off, which is immediately received as over enforcement. So, like I said, it's very hard. Different people do it different ways. There's no right or wrong way, but I created this model to help people think about boundary setting and how it's working in the world, and then relate it to them so that we can all just get better at it.
So I think, Erik, something I think you might have said it at some point, but you haven't mentioned it here. We have a disadvantage as all being wheelchair users. Our body is not physically going to do very much. No one's going to be intimidated by us little child height people in chairs, where our body is not going to necessarily
Right.
do the work for us. We're going to have to use our words probably more often than we could have when we were walking. We're not intimidating.
Right, and that's true. So the thing about that is when you're enforcing the rules, a lot of that is this is societal rules that are being enforced, and we're depending upon institutional enforcement. It's the same thing with the police. Think about this. Wearing the police uniform gives that person tremendous institutional power that they physically don't have. Yeah, a lot of them carry guns. Yes, we have all that still. We have all that. But the fact is, they represent, the institutional state. Now, pretty much, if you're an able-bodied person and you physically attack someone with disability, you're going to have a lot of explaining to do. Right? I mean, that is a fact. So they have, it's much more difficult to, the easiest thing people always claim is self-defense. I killed her in self-defense. I stabbed him in self-defense. He was threatening me. I had no choice but to smash a bottle on his head, right? All of that gets much more difficult to claim when the person has a disability and they're in a wheelchair, because you can just say, well, why didn't you just move away, right? So because of that, we have this advantage. But again, only with people who have some kind of respect for the rules. If you're dealing with somebody who has absolutely no respect for the rules, then that kind of stuff goes out the window. Right?
Yeah, yeah, you're reminding me, well, it's kind of like a double-sided coin, because like people who don't have the respect, it's like, oh, you're vulnerable, cool. Like, well, someone who does have respect, it's like, okay, I'll have a lot of explaining to do. But it reminds me of something that I've thought of myself as like just someone who, drives around and maybe goes somewhere like late at night, leaving parking lot, it's dark, and like we take a longer time to get in and out of cars. And also,
Right.
depending on our adapted car, people are like, oh, interesting, I want to ask you about that. And I haven't encountered that yet, where like someone just like walks up and wants to ask questions and get close. But I've thought beforehand, like what escalation level do I want to go to? And one I can do is, if someone's walking towards my car, I can say, hey, can you stop there? I like to talk with some distance. And then if they violate that boundary or violate that, then I know go to the next escalation. So that's a little
Right.
thing.
No, I think that is excellent. Again, this gets back to what we were saying before. If you set a boundary, then and they violate it, because up to that point you have no idea. Now,
Exactly.
I mean, I've had tons of people. Generally, I try to. My goal is to get my chair in and out as fast as possible, because if I don't, someone's going to come over and either start messing with me or whatever it is.
Oh yeah, can I help? Blah blah. Yeah.
Right. Or have a discussion I'm not interested in having. So that is all of that stuff. Now, that being said, so that's like during the day. Now, if it's late at night, because you're out partying, we're going to assume that Alita's like the quintessential party girl. It's 2 a.m., right? She just got out of the bar. She's parked in a dark parking lot, right? Putting her chair into the car. Now, that being said, pretty much every guy who's respectful knows you don't just go up to women in that situation, because it's going to make them nervous, right?
Yeah.
So if someone's already kind of doing that, you already know something, because they're not taking these steps to make you feel comfortable in a situation where you're likely to be uncomfortable. So if you add to that, like you said, whoa, yeah, you can ask me that question, but we just stay right there. That's fine. And most guys should be like, well, you're right. Whoops. They're probably, they would even, a normal response would be literally to take a few steps back.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to bring in Yaz, because Yaz hasn't said anything. And Yaz is a pretty new injury. And Yaz, you're like 41, right? 42? Yaz? How old are you? Can't hear you. You're muted.
41. I'm sorry. The blender was on in the background just when you started asking the question.
He's 41. He hasn't been hurt that long. So he's probably had, decades as an able-bodied person messing with women and scaring them with his beard, right?
I didn't have the beard most of my life. So only once I remember I scared someone. It was a friend and I sitting in a dark spot on college campus under the tree, and couple of party girls were walking back, and we said, I don't know what we said. We said hello, and they turned towards us and said, "You guys are creepy." So that's the extent of it.
Well, here's a question. If it's a campus and it's dark and some woman is walking alone, do you follow like a few steps behind her?
No, actually, if that was what you were trying to ask me, I was thinking about this one situation. I worked I worked on roadsides, and there was a young woman who had a flat tire in a spot which is really dangerous on one of the highways, and I was driving by, and I immediately stopped. I had strobe lights on my truck, so I stopped behind her. And I was like, okay, well, I don't want to come up as that guy who's like, being macho. So I stood really, really far. I intentionally stood like next to my truck and said, hey, it's kind of a scary spot. Do you need help? And when she responded positively, and I like took a few steps closer, the whole time I made sure there was a lot of distance between her and I. But I was able to help her, and like through the process, she became more comfortable. But that was the whole intention, to get this person off the road. And I was aware of that, like isolation aspect of that situation. So I was conscious of the space, the the physical space.
Right, right. And I guess my point is, this is how normal men behave, right?
Yes.
And
I hope so.
well, I mean, in general, okay, then they throw in some alcohol, they're gonna, whatever. But what we're trying to get across is that when somebody is violating these basic things and not taking consideration how you might feel in that situation, that tells you something.
Yeah.
And that is something to consider as part of the process, as who you're dealing with. Now, again, you could be dealing with somebody with autism, right?
Oh
Who's
yeah.
aware of that. So again, this is why we get back to this whole situation: is are they aware of the rules of behavior? You have to figure out the difference, and it's not easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where like that first thing of communication is really helpful. Where it's like, please do this, like, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So we are at 7:04. So I don't want to keep you guys too long, but is there any any wrap up thing that we want to just throw out there?
Does anyone have any questions, comments, follow-ups for Erik at all?
No, but I like this mindset, and even though you're like, oh yeah, yeah, like I get it, it resonates, it's not really something that I thought that way, right? And so I really like that different perspective, and I think that when I'm in situations, I'm just going to view some of these things differently, and be able to really tell sooner what kind of person that I'm dealing with, and if it's within my energy, to want to take some of it on sometimes.
Right, right. And I think the point here is if you can recognize that most people are effectively, defending what they believe to their own boundaries to be all the time. So that is constantly going on. So if you can get some insight into that, then that's great. That's going to make you more effective. And the more you think about this in terms of like I said, how the world works, and all sorts of different situations, whether it's with employees or bosses or whatever it is, and the better you get, you can actually start to manipulate the other person. And I'm specifically using the term manipulate because there are situations where you want to control, you want to really influence someone else's behavior by understanding what their boundaries are and what they're thinking. You might be able to change it by how you act if your goal is specifically to change their behavior.
Can you give an example, like a real world example of something that you did or something that we would all?
So I have situations where, okay, let's say that I'm in a verbal conflict with somebody, right? Um, and this has happened to me, multiple times. sometimes I will push them to really escalate on me. And then I'll be like, whoa, you're kind of getting out of control, aren't you? And then they're like, and then because if I respond like super mellow to that, like, wow, whoa, what's going on with you? Then all of a sudden they feel stupid because they're expecting me to scream back and then they don't get that. But I actually egg them on a little bit and all of a sudden they're feeling stupid. So I'm saying that that's just one example. But the whole idea here is that when you're doing this stuff, you're doing it through your strategy, not your emotion. So your strategy might make you escalate, but you can still keep your emotion at a certain level. You don't need your emotion to go up with it because when your emotion goes up with it, you're lacking control. So part of that is, so I'll give one quick example is that when most people have difficulty being assertive, and they need emotional energy to be assertive. And they also think of assertiveness in a negative way. So to leave you with this, what is an example of being happy assertive? Happy assertive. Can we think of that?
I don't know. I guess the first thing that popped in my mind was confident assertive, right? Like just
Yeah,
being,
I mean, what's an example like when you see people being happy assertive?
I don't know. I guess I see it more in a confidence way. I see like, okay, they own that situation. If they're gonna own their boundaries, they're gonna say it and they're just gonna like hold face with it and not feel bad about that at the end. Is
Right.
that happy? Is that what you mean by happy?
Oh no. So that is just assertive, and that's fine.
Okay.
I'm saying that we typically don't think of happy assertive, so we can't really think of an example. So I'm going to use an example, hypothetical. Since we already know Alita's like a super party girl and she's like out late at night and stuff, let's assume that she's at a concert and it's her favorite band. And she is like, a couple rows back from the front and they're throwing out t-shirts. What are you doing, Alita?
Oh, I might like call to someone and say, "Hey, toss me one."
Right, right. So you're going to wave your arms and you're going to say, throw it to me. That's happy assertive.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're happily asserting the fact that you want a t-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my point. You can have assertiveness does not have to have a negative connotation. There are happy assertiveness. We just typically don't think of it that way. We typically think of it in a negative manner. And because of that, a lot of people are afraid to be assertive. Because again, they're only assertive when they have some kind of negative emotion and they're pissed off. But I'm saying you can also be happy assertive. Assertiveness has nothing to do with emotion. It's just a mechanism to get your message across. So you waving your hands and saying, I would like a t-shirt, throw it to me is communicating, but you're happy because you really want the shirt, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're just sending a message.
I
And
think
that's
another
happiest. Go
yeah.
ahead.
Another example I can think of is like when you're talking to like a friend and you're like, "No, go for it. Like I'm gonna go with you," or whatever. They're like, "Are you sure?" It's just like, "Yes, I will." You know, that's also kind of happy assertive. I mean, if they have a real boundary, don't go over it, but sometimes they just need like encouragement.
Right, exactly. All right. So we'll leave it with happy assertive.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you guys so much for sticking around the extra few minutes and for having such a really great conversation and getting engaged with sharing different boundary situations and different experiences from your own life. And thank you so much, Erik, for taking your time to share your three pillars and just all of your knowledge with the community today. And so, if you guys have not signed up yet, there are still 2 more nights for Empowerment Week. Tomorrow, we will talk about Community 101, how to get involved with a community, what that community looks like for you, and then how to kind of grow off that to kind of support your independence. And then Friday, we will end the week with a fun movement session. We're going to do some seated Zumba with Tennille. She's been here multiple times, and if you haven't been, it's a good movement time. So thank you guys so much. Have a lovely, lovely evening, and I hope to see you guys all for the rest of the week. So see you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.